The envelope felt heavier than it should. The thick, expensive paper struck a deliberate choice to convey seriousness. It was the kind of stationery usually reserved for wedding invitations or cease and desist letters. Eagle's Nest Estates Architectural Review Committee was embossed in a fussy, pretentious font. I tore it open right there at the mailbox. The midday sun making the chlorine from my morning swim still tickle my nose. The piece I'd felt just an hour earlier, floating on my back and staring at the clouds, evaporated instantly. It wasn't a friendly reminder. It was a notice of noncompliance. Words designed to incite panic. My eyes scanned the legalese, my brain translating the HOA speak. My pool gate latch, a perfectly functional, sturdy bolt lock I'd installed myself, was now a code violation. But the language was what got me. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a decree, citing some obscure, updated community safety standard S7 I'd never heard voted on. The remedy was insultingly specific. I had to buy one particular model from one particular vendor for the low price of $450. The phrase partnered vendor screamed kickback so loudly I almost looked around to see if Carol was watching me read it. But the real kicker, the line that made me actually laugh out loud in disbelief, was the ultimate threat: suspension of your pool privileges. I read it twice, then a third time. My pool privileges. For my pool. In my fenced-in backyard, on the property I paid a mortgage on. The audacity was breathtaking. It was like receiving a notice from a stranger threatening to suspend my privileges to sleep in my own bed. This wasn't about safety. It was a naked power play, the first move in a new campaign of harassment from Brenda's loyal lieutenant. I crumpled the letter in my fist, the crisp paper crunching satisfyingly. The war was back on, and the battlefield was my own backyard. The new latch arrived in a box labeled commercial-grade security, and it felt like overkill for a residential pool gate. Installing it was a 15-minute job filled with muttered curses, not at the difficulty, but at the principle. I sent the required photo to Carol, a close-up of the gleaming, unnecessarily complex magnetic lock, with a fake cheery all set message. Her one-word reply, acknowledged, felt like a door slamming shut. I thought that would be the end of it. I was naive. The next violation arrived exactly 8 days later. This time, the offense was the visible fading of my redwood pool deck. The notice included a grainy, zoomed-in photo, clearly taken from over my fence, showing a 2-inch section where the grain was slightly lighter. The mandated remedy was a full sanding and restaining, using only ARC-approved stain, color, Sequoia shadow. The cost estimate in my head was well over $1,000. A week later, a new envelope complained about the audible hum of my pool pump, alleging it exceeded the ambient daytime decibel limit between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m. This was particularly rich because Carol's own central air conditioning unit was a rattling antique that sounded like a helicopter taking off. The hypocrisy was so blatant it was almost impressive. Each notice was a fresh little paper cut, a deliberate provocation. I'd glance out my kitchen window and see her, sometimes, standing just so on the rise in her yard, a pair of binoculars hanging from her neck like a badge of office. She'd offer a small, tight smile, not a wave, but a silent confirmation. I am watching. I own you. The feeling of being under constant surveillance in my own home transformed the irritation into a cold, simmering anger. This was no longer about a latch. It was a siege. The unauthorized pool party violation was the final straw, but it was also a gift. It was so blatantly absurd that it snapped me out of my defensive posture and into a state of cold, focused offense. Carol wasn't just being petty. She was being sloppy, and sloppy people leave trails. I dragged the heavy file box of HOA documents out from the back of my closet, the one I'd assembled during the Gnome War, and dumped it onto my dining room table. This wasn't a time for highlighters. This was a time for forensic accounting. I started with the specific phrase she kept using, pool privileges. I combed through every bylaw, every amendment, every footnote. And just as I suspected, the term was exclusively used in the context of the community pool. The bylaws gave the board the power to revoke access to common amenities for unpaid dues or serious misconduct. But my pool was never ever referred to as an amenity. It was always categorized as a private residential water feature. This was her critical error. By applying the language of common property to my private property, she had overstepped so dramatically it was legally laughable. But I needed more. I cross-referenced the dates of the new safety standard she cited with the minutes from board meetings over the past year. There was no record of any vote on Standard A7. It was a complete fabrication. I then looked up the partnered vendor for the $450 latch. A quick business registry search showed it was owned by Carol's brother-in-law. The whole thing wasn't just harassment. It was a clumsy, corrupt little scheme. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. She thought she was tightening the screws, but with every bogus notice, she was actually handing me the tools to dismantle her entire authority. The game had just changed. I wasn't going to defend myself against her attacks anymore. I was going to lay a trap and let her walk right into it. The Project Carol folder on my computer was now fat with evidence. Dated photos, violation notices, and my own detailed notes. But it was all defensive. I needed an offense. I needed Carol to put her ultimate threat in writing, to make the abstract harassment concretely, undeniably stupid. So I crafted my weapon, an email. I wrote and rewrote it a dozen times, stripping out any trace of sarcasm or anger. It had to sound like a humble, confused homeowner seeking clarification. A perfectly reasonable request that would force an unreasonable person to show their hand. I didn't just send it to Carol. I CC'd the entire HOA board, including the few members I knew were skeptical of her tactics. This wasn't a private conversation. It was a public record in the making. I clicked send and waited, my phone silent on the desk. The silence stretched for an hour, then two. I imagined the board members reading it, perhaps frowning at the legitimate question. I imagined Carol, probably at her kitchen table, sputtering with indignation that I would dare question her authority in front of others. Her reply hit my inbox like a thunderclap. She hadn't replied to all. She'd replied only to me. It was a tactical error born of pure arrogance. She couldn't resist the urge to put me in my place directly, without witnesses. The email was a masterpiece of condescension, doubling down on the very lie I'd hoped she would. The phrase, "Consider your pool privileges suspended effective immediately," was there, in black and white. I felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated victory. She hadn't just taken the bait. She'd swallowed the hook, the line, the sinker, and was now proudly waving the fishing rod around. I printed the email, the inkjet humming a sweet song of justice. This single piece of paper was no longer just a notice. It was a signed confession. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for her to spring it. The chosen Saturday was a scorcher, the kind of day that makes asphalt shimmer and the idea of a cool pool feel like a basic human right. It was perfect. I didn't just want it to be hot. I needed it to be unbearably so, to sharpen Carol's sense of righteous indignation. I set the stage with care. I unfolded 2 lounge chairs directly beside the pool, their bright blue fabric a blatant symbol of the privilege she had revoked. I placed 2 condensation-covered glasses of lemonade on a small table between them. The pool itself was a sparkling, tantalizing turquoise, the filter humming softly. A pristine oasis begging to be used. My lawyer friend, Mark, arrived not in swim trunks, but in khakis and a polo shirt. "I brought the props," he said with a grin, holding up his briefcase. "We weren't there to swim, we were there to perform." We sat in the chairs, making a show of casual conversation, the untouched pool serving as the silent star of our little theater. I didn't need to look toward Carol's house. I could feel the weight of her gaze. The security camera I'd discreetly mounted under the eaves was recording, but I knew the binoculars would be in use long before she marched over. Right on schedule, I saw the flash of light off her lens from her vantage point. Then the familiar, rigid figure appeared, storming down her driveway with a purpose. I took a slow sip of lemonade. "Showtime," I murmured to Mark. The doorbell rang, a harsh, insistent sound. I waited a beat, letting her simmer, then rose and answered with a calm neutrality that I knew would infuriate her more than any direct confrontation. The heat from the pavement washed over me as I opened the door to face her flushed, furious face. The trap was no longer just set. She was standing right in the middle of it. The 10 minutes it took for the police cruiser to arrive were the longest of Carol's life and the most satisfying of mine. She paced my driveway, shooting me venomous looks, while Mark and I remained in our lounge chairs, sipping our lemonade. I could almost see the steam coming off her. When the familiar patrol car pulled up, Officer Henderson got out, his expression a mask of professional resignation the moment he recognized the address and the players involved. Carol launched into her tirade before his feet even hit the pavement. "Officer, thank God. This man is trespassing. I am the head of the architectural committee and I have suspended his privileges. He is in direct violation of a lawful order." Officer Henderson held up a patient hand. "Ma'am, let's slow down." He turned to me, his voice weary. "Mr. Evans. Trespassing." I remained seated, my posture deliberately relaxed. "Officer, as you can see, we're on my property. We're not swimming, we're just sitting here. Carol seems to believe she has the authority to evict me from my own backyard. His pool privileges are revoked." Carol insisted, waving her phone as if it were a court order. The officer's patience visibly thinned. "Ma'am, with all due respect to your HOA rules, you can't revoke a property owner's right to be on their own land. That's not a thing." "That's what I tried to explain," I said calmly. Then I reached for the manila folder. "But since Carol has chosen to involve you officially, I think you need to see this for the record." I handed him the folder. My deed, and an email from Carol where she explicitly states she is suspending me from my private property. As Officer Henderson read the email, his lips pressed into a thin line. Just then, Mark stood up, smoothing his polo shirt. "Officer Henderson?" "Mark Stevens, representing Mr. Evans. We were just drafting the civil complaint for harassment and wrongful injunction. Would you like a copy of our preliminary filing for your incident report? It details the pattern of fraudulent violations." He held out a legal pad filled with impressively official-looking handwriting. Carol's face collapsed. The sight of a lawyer on the scene, ready to go, was a checkmate she never saw coming. The officer looked from her pale, stunned face to my calm one, and let out a long, slow breath. The game was over. The emergency board meeting felt more like a tribunal. The air in the clubhouse was thick with a tense anticipation, a complete reversal of the last time I'd been in the hot seat. This time, I wasn't the defendant. I was the prosecutor. I laid out the evidence with calm precision. The fabricated safety standard, the kickback scheme with the brother-in-law's company, the illegal suspension email, and the police report that explicitly cited Carol for harassment. I watched the other board members' faces shift from skepticism to shock, and finally to anger. They realized Carol's personal vendetta had exposed the entire HOA to a lawsuit that could bankrupt our reserves. Carol tried to bluster, to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but her authority had evaporated. The evidence was too damning. When the vote came to remove her from the Architectural Review Committee, it was unanimous. She gathered her things without a word, her face a frozen mask of humiliation, and left the room like a deflated parade float. The following Saturday, my backyard was a beautiful chaos. The pool party was a deliberate, glorious act of celebration. Kids splashed, adults laughed, and the grill sent plumes of delicious, disruptive smoke into the air. The music was just a little too loud. I made a point of catching the eye of a few neighbors who had previously avoided me, sharing a smile that acknowledged our shared liberation. From her fortress next door, there was no sign of Carol. The binoculars were gone. The reign of terror was over. As I floated on my lounger, listening to the joyful noise, I knew this victory was sweeter than the last. It wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about reclaiming the simple, profound peace of being left alone in your own home.